It was just an ordinary morning until power, pride, and prejudice collided at 30,000 feet. A black woman in tech boards her private jet, en route to seal the biggest deal of her life. But when airport security sees her, they laugh, mocking the idea that she could own the plane. Minutes later, they block her takeoff with a bogus investigation, and what happens next? It doesn't just expose a deep bias, it brings an entire system to its knees. The flight takes off, but the fallout? It reaches the FAA, the media, and courtrooms alike. What started as humiliation turned into national reckoning. Stay with me. This is a story you won't forget. Before we dive in, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from today? And if this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that expose injustice and honor those who rise above it. Ready? Let's begin. There is a way the world looks at a black woman when she walks with certainty, and there is a way it flinches when that certainty threatens the order it believes it has earned. Lenora Grant had walked through many corridors in her lifetime, corporate ones, government ones, quiet ones where ideas were whispered rather than spoken. But never had she walked through a place as primed for judgment as the private terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson. It began, as it often does, not with words, but with a look. Not the kind of look that simply scans a boarding pass or checks the clock on the wall, but the kind that sizes a body, files it away under assumptions, and waits for reality to confirm its bias. Lenora, dressed in a slate-gray pantsuit and modest heels, carried only a leather portfolio and the kind of focus that made others uncomfortable. She had learned long ago not to apologize for that. Her jet, the LP Aurora, sat outside on the tarmac like a promise made flesh. It gleamed not from wealth but from purpose, purchased after years of tireless negotiation, innovation, and enough red-eye flights to crisscross the country thrice over. She was a technologist, yes, but more than that, she was a builder of machines, of bridges, of futures. The guards at the terminal had not read her biography. They saw her approach and leaned back in their stools as if her confidence had a smell. One of them, a man with the posture of a retired bully, gave a small, ironic chuckle before she even spoke. "You lost, miss?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation disguised as courtesy. "No," Lenora said, placing her documents down with care. "I'm flying out on LP Aurora. Clearance code and tail number are both here." The younger guard, a woman no older than 30, lifted the papers as though they might bite. She skimmed them without intention, her eyes already fixed not on the lines of code that proved ownership, but on the face of the woman who dared to hand them over. "That's your plane." A pause long enough to taste. "Yes," Lenora replied. There it was again, that ancient tone. Not disbelief. Not even mockery. Just familiarity. That slow unraveling of dignity by 10,000 cuts. The man laughed now, a full laugh, open and raw like a wound. "We get all kinds through here," he said, loud enough for the others in line to hear. Rappers, influencers, people who flash a rented jet for the gram. "You sure you didn't just hitch a ride, sweetheart?" Lenora did not flinch. She did not curse or raise her voice. She had learned that the world required black women to be calm when the world itself was on fire. "I own the plane," she said again. "It's registered under Grant Strategic Technologies. Call the FAA if you must." And they would. They always did. Because it was easier to doubt her than to accept her. Easier to imagine the paperwork was forged than to believe a woman like her had earned her way to the sky. As she waited, watched, whispered about, and doubted, Lenora thought of her grandmother, a sharecropper's daughter who could not read, but who taught her that silence was sometimes the sharpest protest. She remembered being told that if she worked twice as hard, she might earn half the respect. And now, standing there in a glass building she helped design the software for, she knew how true that prophecy had become. This was the beginning of it, not the storm, but the stirring of the wind. The part of the story where everything still looked ordinary if you didn't look too closely. But in the quiet shift of a jaw, in the careless toss of credentials across a desk. You could hear it, the deep, unspoken fear of a world where Lenora Grant owned the plane, the patents, and the sky. The most dangerous racism, Lenora had once told a room full of uneasy donors, is not the kind that screams in the streets. It is the kind that whispers behind desks, smiles at brunch, and laughs quietly when you board a plane you own. That morning, the whisper had grown into a low hum, the kind you feel in your bones before you even hear it. She stood at the terminal window, watching the minutes slip through her fingers like dry sand. Outside, Aurora shimmered in the Georgia sun, engines humming gently, its polished body reflecting a dream that once seemed impossible. And yet here she stood, delayed, detained, diminished. "They're just running your paperwork," the younger security agent said, voice laced with faux boredom. "It's protocol." But Lenora had lived long enough to know what protocol really meant, a pause invented to give time for prejudice to catch up. She checked her watch again. The meeting in Manhattan was not just another summit. It was the summit. Department heads from the UN, senior executives from a global supply chain conglomerate, and yes, even the Secretary of Energy. She was to present on autonomous tech corridors, routes where drone fleets and electric vehicles communicated in real time, reducing congestion and emissions across cities. It was a vision she'd written code for. A future she had architected. Now, that future was being held hostage by a woman with a badge and a man with a smirk. The phone rang behind the counter. The older guard answered it, his face suddenly shifting from smug certainty to vague discomfort. He lowered his voice, murmured something, then glanced at Lenora like a man realizing the joke he'd been telling had walked out of the room. "Miss Grant," he muttered, clearing his throat. "They confirmed your credentials with the FAA. You're good to go." But it wasn't the words. It was the tone, flat, reluctant, like an apology wrapped in disdain. She gathered her documents with calm fingers, careful not to show the tremor building beneath her resolve. "Thank you," she said, though it tasted like vinegar. She began walking toward the glass doors that led to the tarmac. Just then, the radio at the agent's waist crackled to life. "Hold boarding." "Repeat, hold boarding." "FAA security has flagged a cargo discrepancy on tail number G6AUR. Ground inspection required." Lenora froze. The guards didn't look surprised. "Oh," the younger one said, barely hiding a grin. "Seems we need to hold you a little longer." "Shouldn't be long. They just want to double-check." Double-check. A phrase that sounds harmless to most. But to a black woman in a tailored suit with a schedule to keep, it's a trapdoor. One wrong word, one flash of justified anger, and the whole story flips, no longer a professional delayed, but an agitated subject, a suspicious individual. Lenora inhaled slowly, resisting the instinct to argue. The past had taught her, when you raise your voice, they hear rage, not reason. When you demand your rights, they call it disorder. She turned to face the older agent. "Who flagged the discrepancy?" she asked, voice low but unwavering. He shrugged. "Could have been an automated system. Could have been a complaint." "A complaint," she echoed, like tasting a bitter fruit. "Filed by whom?" "Can't say." "Of course not." Lenora stepped aside, pulling her phone from her bag. She dialed her pilot. "They're claiming there's a cargo issue," she said. "You've seen the manifest. You loaded the jet." Captain Ellis's voice, calm but clipped, crackled through. "Manifest's clean, Lenora. Only cargo on board is your briefcase, one backup drive, and your overnight bag." Someone's fishing. Fishing. That was the word. Because that's what it was. Fishing for an excuse. For a reason to prove their suspicion right. For a way to make her small again. She looked around the terminal. A man in a golf shirt and shorts had just breezed through, his duffel bag unchecked. A pair of young white women were laughing at the cafe, sipping champagne while their Pomeranian shivered in a designer purse. No one had stopped them to double-check their cargo. No one had whispered about protocols or flagged suspicious activity. No, that was a luxury reserved for her. She turned back toward the agents. While you check your system, she said quietly, I'll be contacting you legally. The older man flinched, but said nothing. The younger one rolled her eyes. Of course you will. Lenora stepped away and dialed her attorney. The call connected instantly. Melanie, we've got an issue. FAA flag. Cargo discrepancy. No explanation. Melanie sighed. Do not say another word to them. I'm calling the airport supervisor. Send me everything. Lenora hung up, feeling the weight of it again. The burden of always having to be composed. Of carrying 1,000 years of history in every step, every breath. She thought of her father, who used to tell her that progress doesn't always look like fireworks. It sometimes looks like standing still when you're dying to scream. Minutes passed. Then more. The guards didn't speak again. Finally, a tall woman in a blazer with an airport badge approached, her stride brisk, her expression unreadable. Miss Grant. Yes. I'm terribly sorry. We've reviewed the data. There was a mistaken code entry. You're cleared to board. That was it. No apology. No explanation for who filed the complaint. Just a bureaucratic shrug and a new stamp of permission, like a prison gate swinging open just because the guard felt like it. Lenora walked toward her plane, chin high, heels clicking like metronomes of defiance. Behind her, the agents whispered again. But she didn't turn back. Because she had something they could never touch. Flight. And that, perhaps, is what scared them most. The sky does not care what color you are. At 39,000 feet, there are no borders, no checkpoints, no sideways glances from badge-wearing men. There is only the hum of the engines, the soft rustle of filtered air, and the vast blue horizon stretched like a promise. But Lenora Grant knew better than to think the world left its claws behind on the tarmac. Even in the clouds, racism had a seat belt fastened and a headset on. She sat alone in her jet, a glass of water untouched beside her, her laptop open to the first slide of a presentation that could change the way cities breathed. Drone corridors. Data intelligence. Real-time routing. Ideas she had spent years building, brick by invisible brick, often while sitting in rooms filled with people who couldn't imagine someone like her had built anything at all. But the numbers didn't lie. Lenora's company had reduced emergency delivery times by 42% in 3 major cities. They'd rerouted supply lines during a hurricane when FEMA was days behind. Her tech had saved lives. And yet, none of it was strong enough to stop a smirk at the airport. Or the word sweetheart. Or the phantom cargo discrepancy that evaporated under scrutiny. As the plane climbed past the scattered clouds, Lenora leaned back and stared at the ceiling. She thought of her grandfather, who had flown a crop duster in Mississippi and had never once been allowed to land at the Big White Run airstrip 20 miles west. He used to tell her that black folks had to build planes while flying M. She sipped her water and tried to focus. The summit in New York awaited. She'd present at 3:15. A 22-minute talk. 7 minutes for Q&A. Every second is calibrated. She knew how to speak their language, concise, commanding, modest, but not meek. She knew when to raise her voice and when to drop it so low they leaned in, thinking they were discovering something that had lived in her the whole time. But just as she settled in to rehearse the opening slide, a soft chime sounded overhead, the intercom. Miss Grant, came the voice of Captain Ellis. Calm, measured. We've received a communication from the FAA. They're requesting we confirm the identity of all persons on board. Standard check, apparently. Her brow furrowed. All persons, she echoed, allowed to no one. She pressed the cabin intercom button. Captain, there's only me. A pause. Then yes, ma'am. That's what I told them. She exhaled slowly. Identity checks at altitude weren't standard. They weren't even in protocol. They were whispers dressed up as procedure. They were echoes of slave passes and sundown towns. Lenora knew history, knew how systems learned to smile as they pressed your face into the soil. Let me know if they request anything else, she said into the mic. Yes, ma'am. She returned to her laptop, but the spell had broken. The numbers blurred. The diagrams of drone intersections felt distant. The summit felt 1,000 miles away, not just in geography, but in spirit. She knew that even if she nailed her presentation, even if she dazzled them, they would still mention her poise more than her parents. They would marvel at how articulate she was, as if language were some borrowed garment instead of the blood in her veins. She looked out the window. The clouds were thinning. The sun danced on the wings. And still, that message from the FAA echoed in her head. The problem with racism, she'd once written in a column for The Atlantic, is that it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply asks questions it never asks anyone else. Sometimes it smiles and tells you it's just checking for safety. Sometimes it clutches its purse when you pass. And sometimes it calls you Miss Grant with just enough ice to remind you who they think you are. She powered down the laptop and stared straight ahead. No jazz, no gospel, no sermon could soothe her now. But neither would they stop her. Lenora wasn't flying to prove anything. She wasn't flying to inspire little girls. She wasn't flying to make white executives feel good about diversity. She was flying because she owned the sky now. And every mile forward, every minute in the air, chipped away at a system that had once declared her invisible. So she sat back, strapped in, and let the engines sing her forward, not toward escape, but toward confrontation. Because sometimes the only way to tear down a ceiling is to fly above it. There's a moment, just after the wheels kiss the runway, just before the cabin lights flicker on, when the sky lets you go and the earth decides what to do with you. Lenora Grant felt it in her bones as the jet rolled to a gentle stop on the private tarmac of Teterboro. She had made it. But safety was never just about landing. Not for someone who wore her skin like a flag in a nation that still couldn't decide whether to salute it or burn it. The stairs lowered. The engines cooled. The tarmac shimmered in the late morning sun. Lenora stepped out, blazer sharp, posture unbending, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder like a weapon. Her driver stood waiting by the black SUV, but so did two others, badges on their hips, earpieces curling behind their ears, eyes too flat to be curious and too direct to be neutral. Miss Grant, one asked, his voice clipped, too formal for courtesy. Yes, we need to verify your identity and cargo. Routine, he said. Routine. That word again. She gave him her documents. He examined them too long, eyes dancing over her license like it was a riddle he hadn't been trained to read. His partner opened the trunk, peeked into her bags, radioed someone. No warrant. No suspicion. Just the quiet confidence of men who knew they could stall her and call it protocol. Is there a problem? She asked, voice calm as granite. We've had reports of inconsistencies, he said. She didn't ask what kind. She already knew. Her name on a jet manifest had stirred something in a desk-bound stranger's gut. Not fear. No doubt. Just discomfort. The kind that made people wonder out loud, how'd she afford that? The kind that led to a call just to be sure. I'm expected at the Midtown Summit in 37 minutes, she said. Unless you plan to arrest me, I suggest you let me go. The man hesitated. Not out of guilt. Men like him were taught to mask that, but because she hadn't flinched. She didn't plead. Didn't get loud. She made it clear, you're not the one in charge here. He stepped aside. You're clear. No apology. No smile. Just the release of a gate that should never have been shut. As the SUV pulled into traffic, Lenora stared at the skyline rising ahead of her. Steel and glass spires carved from capital and ambition. She knew these towers, had pitched deals in their boardrooms and dined in their penthouses. And still, in lobbies and elevators, they'd ask if she was the assistant. The intern. The plus one. She'd once thought achievement would buy her peace. That success was armor. But the armor only made the bullets sharper. She remembered her grandmother's words, From a time when separate but equal was law and not just practice. They'll let you in the room, baby, but they'll try to keep you by the door. Lenora wasn't built to wait by doors. She was built to own the room. The SUV weaved through Midtown. Horns blared. Cyclists darted past. The city moved fast, but its ideas moved slow, especially about people like her. Still, she pressed forward. At the summit hall, a young white assistant met her with a clipboard and a hesitant smile. "Are you here for delivery?" Lenora smiled, tight and cold. "No. I'm here to deliver a future." The assistant blushed, stammered, then looked at the tablet again. "Oh, you're the keynote." "I am." He waved her in without another word. And there it was again, not cruelty, not overt insult, but that everyday erosion. That trained assumption. That invisible wall built of looks, of pauses, of all the times someone didn't expect you to be you. But Lenora didn't break stride. Didn't offer an explanation. She walked into the backstage corridor like she belonged there, because she did. Outside, the world would keep asking for her credentials. But on that stage, she would offer something greater than permission. She would offer proof. Proof that she could fly, land, and rise again, all without their blessing. When Lenora stepped into the light, it wasn't the warmth that greeted her. It was the weight. The kind of weight that comes not from stage fright, but from knowing every word, every syllable, would be measured not just against your resume, but against your skin. The Midtown Innovation Summit was a place of sharp suits, polished accents, and pressed smiles. It was built for people who made decisions in rooms with glass walls and ceilings that never shattered for them. Lenora stood there, a black woman in a sea of privilege, and she knew, before she even opened her mouth, what they saw. Some saw a trailblazer. Others saw a mistake. The host gave her a brief, clipped introduction. Up next, the founder of a drone logistics firm. Please welcome Miss Lenora Grant. Mississippi. Not doctor. Not the CEO. Just Miss, casual, vague, deliberately small. As if they weren't sure how to fit her into the program. Polite applause followed. Not the kind that welcomed, but the kind that waited to see what she'd do. Lenora didn't blink. She approached the podium, set down her notes, and looked out at the room. Some faces looked curious. Others looked skeptical. And a few, only a few, looked open. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries," she began. "Time is what people like me never had the luxury to waste." The room fell still. "My company builds autonomous delivery drones. We've partnered with multiple cities to reduce delivery emissions and improve medical access in underserved neighborhoods. I say this not to impress you, but to clarify that I am not here by accident." Her voice was calm, but underneath it ran the current of fire. "Still, even today, I'm asked if I'm in the right room. I'm stopped on the tarmacs. I'm interrogated for owning a jet I paid for with contracts I earned. I'm treated at every turn like a visitor in a house I built." A few murmurs stirred. One man in the second row shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward his colleague. A woman near the back crossed her arms, as if steeling herself against being implicated. Lenora saw it. She'd seen it her whole life. Not the blatant kind of racism, no, that was too old, too loud for modern boardrooms. This was the quieter version. The sigh when you speak too confidently. The pause when they scan your resume and say, "Impressive, for someone like you." The look that wonders how you got here and quietly decides it had to be luck. "Let me be clear," Lenora continued. "I don't want a seat at the table if I must beg for it. I don't need permission to innovate. I don't need validation from institutions that only now realize we were the architects all along." The projector lit up behind her, displaying the drones her company had developed. Sleek, efficient, revolutionary. Tools for cities that had forgotten the people in their margins. One slide showed a drone delivering an EpiPen to a child in a neighborhood where ambulances arrived 20 minutes too late. "This," she said, "isn't charity. It's a strategy. Communities ignored by infrastructure are now markets primed for innovation." And if you don't invest because I'm the one building it, well, history already has your address. It sends its regrets. Now the crowd was fully still. And then, a man stood up. Gray suit, white hair, credentials as long as her company's client list. Miss Grant, he said. There was that miss again. Your presentation is certainly passionate. But don't you think bringing race into a business summit distracts from your data? Lenora smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough to let the room know she had heard that line before, too many times to count. Sir, she said, if I didn't bring race into it, you would have. You just would have waited until I left. A chuckle came from somewhere in the room. Then silence again. I don't talk about race to distract myself. I talk about it because it's always already in the room. It was there when I was questioned at the airport. It's there when banks offer me worse lending terms than my white counterparts. It's there when my achievements are seen as anomalies instead of proof. I bring it up because you already believe it. I just say it out loud. The man sat down, no retort ready. Lenora pivoted, shifted back to the data. She finished her pitch, clear, measured, undeniable. When she closed her laptop, she stood still, letting the moment breathe. Then someone clapped. One person, then another. Then a slow, rising rhythm filled the hall. Not thunderous, but steady, like something awakening. She saw the applause was not from the front rows, the ones closest to power, but from the sides, the back, the ones who'd come looking for something real. She had given it to them. Lenora stepped off the stage. She had crossed another invisible line. And somewhere behind her, the ones who had doubted were now doing math, not with numbers, but with eyes. Trying to recalculate the value of the person they had almost dismissed. They clapped for Lenora, but they didn't stand. Not the ones in the front. Not the ones with the monogrammed cufflinks and inherited gate codes. They offered applause the way you offer it to a street musician who hit a beautiful note. Momentary admiration, no intention to follow. And Lenora knew. The next morning, the emails came. A few from well-meaning allies. Incredible speech, Lenora. So powerful. And then came the ones that mattered more. Quiet. Vague. We're reassessing Q3 partnerships. Looking into alignment. Pending board approval. Corporate dialect for were spooked. She had told the truth. She had done it beautifully. But truth, as James Baldwin once said, is not always liked. Especially when it reveals the house is built on contradictions. By noon, Lenora sat in a minimalist conference room, flanked by her operations lead and legal counsel. They were parsing through contract delays. UPS still hadn't countersigned. I think it's your speech, Jamal said. Not the content, but the fact that you said it in front of them. You mean the fact that I didn't whisper? Lenora asked, bitter amusement in her tone. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That's how it worked. America didn't mind a black woman building a company, as long as she didn't point out how many rooms she had to clean just to get through the front door. Lenora had touched the third rail of race in business. And not with tears. Not with a plea. But with a voice so calm it made denial impossible. And that scared people. The CEO of another logistics firm texted her, "Bold move yesterday. You're brave." But brave, Lenora knew, was too often another word for expendable. She left the meeting early, needing air. Midtown was gray, suffocating in its own ambition. She walked until her heels ached, found herself on a bench at Bryant Park, surrounded by noise and motion. A street preacher shouted about sin. A toddler wailed in a stroller. Somewhere, saxophone jazz played. And in that mess, she remembered her grandmother's voice again. They won't always clap when you're right. But you'll still be right. That was the cost. Back at her hotel, the assistant manager, a young white man in a tailored vest, hesitated when she approached the concierge desk. "Yes, ma'am? Can I help you?" She handed over her keycard. "Room 1804. Can you call up? My laptop charger's missing." He glanced at the name on the card. "Oh, Ms. Grant," he said, the hesitation dropping away. Of course. She knew that tone shift. Knew it better than most people knew the alphabet. The initial suspicion. The sudden pivot. The slow realization that she belongs. And therein lay the slow poison of racism in daily life, not in slurs or open violence, but in the pause. The second glance before help. The delay in signature. The doubting of ownership. No one would call that racism outright. They'd call it security, policy, procedure. But it was racism all the same, just repackaged for polite society. Later that night, Lenora stood by her hotel window and watched the city blink. She was supposed to celebrate. She had just delivered one of the most talked about keynotes in the tech world. But instead of champagne, she held bottled water and a tight jaw. The summit organizers emailed her a thank you note, and attached was a press release. It quoted her lightly, sanitized her message, made her sound neutral. Gone was the fire. Gone the truth about airport security, about the glass runway she had to sprint down barefoot. They quoted her on innovation, but not injustice. On efficiency, but not equity. Lenora closed the email, then opened her social media account and typed a message. Today, my words were edited for comfort. But I didn't come this far to be comfortable. I came to be heard. So let me say it again. I belong here. I've earned my place. And if my presence makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. She hit send. And the replies poured in. Some praised her. Some warned her. A few told her to keep politics out of business. But Lenora knew, business was always political. It just pretend otherwise. The applause hadn't cost her just yet. But the silence after? It was starting to show its teeth. The thing about truth in this country is that it makes noise long after it's been spoken. It travels under the skin of conversation, beneath the quiet hum of polite corporate meetings, through the echo of smiling gatekeepers who call you impressive but never return your call. And for Lenora Grant, the truth she had spoken, plain, dignified, unshakable, was beginning to cause tremors in the floors above and below her. The press, as they do, caught fire. Not because they loved her, but because they loved a good story. Young Black CEO challenges industry bias after airport ordeal. From profiled to powerful, Lenora Grant's summit speech sparks debate. Suddenly, everyone had a microphone and an opinion. Some praised her bravery. Others said she was overreacting. A few leaned on that tired word, divisive. But racism in America is always called divisive by those who've never been divided by it. Within 48 hours, Lenora was invited to speak on a panel at Columbia. A think tank emailed her about contributing an op-ed. A legacy brand, one that had turned her down for partnership the year before, now wanted to collaborate. But with every offer came a hidden clause, a gentle suggestion to tone down the race part, an unspoken rule. Speak boldly, but don't name names. Smile, Lenora. Don't be scared of money. She was no stranger to this. As a Black woman, she'd spent a lifetime reading between lines no one else admitted were there. The way a man's handshake softened once he saw her press badge. The way investors asked about her team before asking about her product, as if trying to confirm someone else, someone wider, was the real mind behind the work. But this time was different. Now, she was both admired and watched. A symbol. A threat. One morning, while preparing for a follow-up meeting with UPS executives, her assistant, Nia, rushed in. Lenora, she said, laptop in hand. There's a rumor going around. Anonymous forum post. Someone claiming you falsified parts of your credentials. Lenora looked up from her notes. Which part? Nia hesitated. Georgia Tech. They're saying you dropped out. That your degree was honorary. There's no name attached, but it's circulating. Lenora exhaled. Long, slow. Not surprised, only tired. That's how the world tries to put you back in your place when you step out of it. Not by confronting your success, but by eroding the foundation beneath it. She opened her own file, degrees, transcripts, and official seals. She had everything. And still, it burned. Because this is what racism does. It whispers in boardrooms and echoes in private Slack channels. It doesn't always wear hoods or badges. Sometimes it wears Armani and says, "Let's circle back on this later." Later, of course, never comes. She decided not to respond, not yet. Instead, she walked out of her office and into the heart of her company, the engineering floor, where her mostly black and brown team huddled over algorithms and drone blueprints. These were the people she had built Parker Innovations for. Truth is, she told them, we weren't just building machines, we were building freedom. One delivery at a time. And freedom never comes without a price. That afternoon, an intern sent her a screenshot. Someone had edited her Wikipedia page. Her credentials were listed, but a note had been added, disputed by anonymous sources. Lenora chuckled. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. When you are Black in power, your very biography becomes a battleground. Your existence must be proven again and again, long after the paperwork is filed. And always to people who never had to prove theirs. She called her lawyer, called her publicist. But more than that, she called her mother. "Mama," she said, "they're trying to erase me." Her mother paused. Then, in that slow, Southern-laced tone that carried both steel and sanctuary, replied, "Baby girl, they can try. But they didn't write your story, so they don't get to erase it." That night, Lenora wrote her own piece, an open letter, not for the corporations or the critics, but for the girls like her, sitting in small apartments, staring at visions no one else could see. This isn't just about a plane or a rumor or a summit. It's about the quiet ways this country tries to keep you in your lane. I've spent my life flying past those lanes. And I won't stop now. She posted it. The next morning, the world read it. And the tremors turned into quakes. There comes a time in every fight when the noise dies down, not because the war is over, but because the air becomes too heavy with truth to speak above it. And Lenora Grant knew, as she stood before that National Oversight Panel in Washington, D.C., that this silence was not peace. It was the moment before the verdict, the breath before the blow. She was no longer just the woman with the private jet or the drone company or the scandalous open letter. She had become something else entirely, an emblem. And every emblem is first burned before it's raised. Her open letter had gone viral. Flying while black, the modern skies of prejudice. Tens of thousands had reposted it. Civil rights groups praised her. Old classmates reached out. The same people who once sat in quiet rooms and let the jokes slide now wanted to stand beside her. But praise was never protection. Because along with the flood of support came the smear campaign, a blurry photo of her teenage years, a misinterpreted quote from an old podcast, a grainy clip of her refusing an interview at LAX. Conservative outlets called her entitled. Others claimed she played the race card. One headline screamed, "Jet Queen or just another angry woman?" The irony was grotesque, how quickly a Black woman could be reduced to a caricature for defending herself. And yet, Lenora never flinched. In the weeks following the summit, she was summoned to testify at an FAA ethics inquiry, a hearing supposedly about airport protocol, but really, it was about her. The room was cold. The men on the panel were older, white, and stiff with the kind of decorum that masks disdain. They smiled, but their eyes said, "Know your place." One of them leaned forward and asked, "Miss Grant, can you help us understand why you chose not to return to the airport when requested? Wouldn't that have prevented all this public unrest?" Lenora let the question settle. Then she said, "I didn't cause the unrest. I revealed it. There's a difference." A murmur passed through the room. She continued, "If the question is why I didn't turn back, it's because I've been turning back my whole life. Turning back when someone mispronounced my name and I didn't correct them. Turning back when colleagues talked over me in meetings. Turning back when teachers assumed I was lucky, not brilliant. This time, I stayed the course. Another panelist, a woman, tight-lipped and impeccably dressed, interjected, "We understand the racial context, Miss Grant. But not everything is about race." Lenora didn't blink. "No, ma'am. But everything in this country has been touched by it. You may not see the fingerprints, but we live with the smudges." Silence. Again. They asked more questions. Legal ones. Technical ones. But she answered each with grace sharpened by fire. Every word, a blade forged in history. Every sentence, a reckoning. By the end of the session, it was clear they could no longer deny what she represented. Outside the hearing, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name. But Lenora didn't stop. She walked through the chaos like a woman who had finally buried her chains. Back at her office that night, she looked out at the city skyline. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. "You held your head high. Your grandfather would be proud. He marched so you could fly." Lenora stared at that message for a long time. Because that's what the story was always about. Not just her jet, not just her company, not even the partnership she had secured. It was about lineage. About the weight of those who walked before her and the responsibility to clear a path for those yet to come. She sat down and opened her laptop. A fresh document. A new initiative. Project Horizon, creating a mentorship pipeline for Black girls in STEM. She typed with purpose. Let them try to ground her. She had already learned how to fly through storms. And if the sky itself dared to close, she would build another runway.